All right, it is a Tuesday edition of AU Undercover and Sidelines. Producer Brendan Martin making everything happen behind us. And Doug Dean going to join Ronnie Sanders and me in just a moment. Ronnie, where do you even start with so much stuff happening down at Auburn? Big game tonight, Vanderbilt, and Saturday, the first time ever, number one Auburn, number two Alabama, and the IBOB, as Kevin Skarbinski calls it, the Iron Bowl of basketball. Brendan smiling a little bit from what happened Saturday, but we'll just moving right along. Nothing to see here, Ronnie.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend. I think this is the first time there's ever been a 1-2 matchup in the Southeastern Conference. And for it to be Auburn and Alabama, that's pretty, if it was Kentucky and Tennessee or Kentucky and Arkansas back in the day, or even Kentucky and Florida, when Florida was good, that's one thing. But I mean, for it to be Auburn and Alabama, that's a pretty unique thing in this state. And one thing, I've lived back here 4 years. We lived in Orlando for 12 and lived in Gainesville for 3 before that. And it matters here. Everything does. And it's not just football. It's basketball, it's football, it's softball, it's academics, it's, endowments, it's everything. So it's a pretty neat thing right now.
It really is. And looking on, I go to the AU Undercover website, I'll admit it, 15 times a day probably. And there's a lot of great content on there. Doug Dean will be on in just a minute. Before we do that, DJ Durkin news on the contract extension is a big deal.
It is. I think he had some interest from some other places, and I think now he's the second highest paid coordinator in the country at $2.5 million, something to that effect. So, big deal for Auburn. DJ Durkin, for those who don't know, is a Will Muschamp guy. Was at Florida with him. Is very well thought of. He's also the former head coach at Maryland. That didn't end well, but in this day and time, it's not uncommon to see a guy get another shot. But DJ's done a terrific job at Auburn. He's very well liked by the administration, on the coaching staff, by the players. He's really been terrific. And I think a much different aura around him versus Ron Roberts last year or the year before.
Yeah, and Ronnie, Auburn does a great job of keeping their players. If you take a look at the portal, Walker White was a guy I think a lot of people had high hopes for, but at best he would have been third on the depth chart. So Auburn didn't get hurt in the portal, but they brought some really good players in. Before we get into a lot of basketball talk, can't talk enough about Auburn football. Kind of take the portal, what Auburn brought in, and see where these guys are going to likely fit in.
Well, they went out and signed the kid from Oklahoma, who's expected to be the starter, and so right now you've got four. You got four new quarterbacks. They always want to carry four. Freeze likes to carry four quarterbacks. So you've got four quarterbacks, four new quarterbacks in the room. So it's
well, and Ronnie, you look at the quarterback position in the SEC right now. You've got everybody's been waiting on Arch Manning to assume the mantle at Texas, but I can't remember a year where across the board there's less depth at the position. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, he's ranked by a lot of people as the front runner for the Heisman Trophy. That surprises me. But if you look at LSU, you brought in Joe Burrow from Ohio State, 2018. 2019, he wins the Heisman. Jaden Daniels, 22 and 23 from Arizona State. Now Auburn's bringing in Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma. When he came out of high school, I think he was the number 4 quarterback in America, number 10 overall player. I think he grew up in the Atlanta metro area, moved after his sophomore season to the Dallas Metroplex, and had 2 big years out there, goes to Oklahoma. Wasn't working out for him. 46 sacks Oklahoma gave up last year. He didn't have much of a supporting cast. Contrast that to what he's going to have when he steps on campus, when he's already at Auburn to start spring practice.
Well, I think it's important that he's there for spring, and Auburn overall talent wise is better than it's been in, I mean, considering you had four consecutive losing seasons,
Yeah.
uh, it's been pretty rough for the last 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it's been. So um, the talent level is significantly upgraded over the past handful of years. So he should be in a position where um, he's going to have a chance to be successful. That being said, I mean, Freeze likes to throw the ball, and he will have plenty of chances to throw the ball. And there's some really good receivers. Now Auburn found a bunch of ways to lose games last season, so uh, we'll see how that works out. But he should have plenty of talent to go out, block for him, catch the ball. Running back, you got to figure out who that is. Jarquez Hunter's gone, but there's plenty of talent for him to spread the ball around.
And you look at the receiving core. What's amazing to me is that Bryce Kane and Malcolm Robinson uh, and Malcolm Simmons and Perry Thompson and Cam Coleman all stayed.
Mm-hmm.
Plus an addition with Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. That is a major addition to the receiver room. You got Jeremiah Cobb, Damari Austin, some other guys, Alvin Henderson coming in out of Elba at running back. And your guys are expected to pull out of the driveway like they live in the middle of the interstate, doing 110 when they get on campus. And a lot of that's they come in January. Talk about this freshman receiving core, how much development you saw in year one, and who you looked at and you said, man, maybe he's not that good. But I don't know if you got enough tape on anyone other than Cam Coleman to say that, and Malcolm Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, obviously, coming out of high school, all those guys super talented, um, and I think all of them can play. You talk to people around the program, and they feel really good about the receivers. They feel really good about the quarterback room. They think that they got a chance to have a pretty good year. Now, Freeze also has said, "Hey, look, don't judge us by what happens in the first 2 years. Judge us by what happens in year 3 or year 4." Well, now it's year 3,
Yeah.
so we're about to find out. And in this day and age, yes, he was left a mess, but the rebuild in this era right now with the portal, the window is shorter, and uh, there's going to be some pressure. Now, do I think Auburn's going to have a good year? Yes. Do I think if it starts slow that there's going to be a lot of chatter? Absolutely, because that's what makes this job and a lot of other jobs great. Because people want to win, and the support is there, and it's going to be an interesting year for sure. But there are a lot of people around Auburn who are super excited about this coming season.
Well, they do want to win right away. And, Jason Caldwell said on our morning show, SEC Sidelines Sports, uh, that that was the worst roster. And I agreed with him. He'd seen in his lifetime at Auburn.
Yeah.
But you go back in a similar situation when Pat Dye came in, he had some talent. I mean, there were some really good players. 37 guys left that first spring. I think about when you look at that freshman class in 1980 of Lionel James and Greg Carr and Quincy Williams and some guys like that 4 years later were SEC champions, and they were ranked ninth or 10th out of 10 at the time, SEC schools. Player development's big.
Mhm.
You know it from being a coach. It takes a couple of years. It's hard to get guys to stick around that. Contrast the Auburn offensive line of 3 years ago with what Auburn's product is on the field, or at least going into winter workouts, the mat drills, which the players love. They always talk about how much they love mat drills.
Yeah.
Just I love taking penicillin shots too.
Yeah. I mean, I always loved winter workouts. It was great to get in there at 5 o'clock in the morning, especially when you got home from the supper club at 4:30.
That's right. That's right.
But
Have the bus drop me off at the complex.
yeah, I did that many a days. But you know, it, the talent level doesn't compare. And I think that uh, this coaching staff, unlike the last one, I mean, you don't have the head coach going around telling people that we're going to outcoach people in this league the way that Mr. Potato Head did.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Never
a
seen anything
completely
like it.
different, it's
Yeah.
a completely different atmosphere. And look, I don't know if Freeze is going to be successful at Auburn. I think he will be, but this is his shot, and they've got a lot of really, really good players, and he's done a terrific job putting it together. He's got a good staff, and they've recruited really well, and they've spread around the NIL money. They've done a really good job. So now it's got to show up on the field.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Auburn, the last couple of years, they've lost so many close games. And if you look specifically and say, what position was it? Probably quarterback. And I don't think that Peyton Thorne's the worst quarterback ever. I question some of the schemes Auburn's been running. I think there's, you know, that's up for debate, but I don't think they could have done better. But it almost looked like last year Freeze and the coaches at Auburn were trying to appease that group of those four receivers and some other positions. So the running game wasn't developed early on. And but and that could be true. That's just a theory I have. But more than anything, it's the offensive line. It's so damn hard to develop those guys. But let's bring Doug Dean in from Birmingham on here with us, Rondy. Kind of, Ronnie, we'll get into this mix. And I'm sure you've been in that Birmingham traffic today, Doug.
Oh, it's glorious. We got rain coming down, and that means automatically everybody's got to go 5 miles an hour, right?
Yeah. So, well, there's nothing like the downhill slope there at Grandview Medical Center. I mean, it doesn't, Ronnie. It doesn't matter if it's 12 o'clock, middle of the day. It's always packed. But
Ronnie, it's good to see you. I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
hey, man, we are talking, Doug. I know it's a tough one, but can I get you to jump in here with us and talk some Auburn football? We're really talking about the offensive line and everything as they head into spring. And I know you had something you wanted to throw in here to Ronnie and everybody watching about DJ Durkin too, because that's a big story.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all already covered it, but of course it was you could say, at least in Auburn circles, maybe in a weird way, Ohio State circles, a lead story. Let's not bury the lead, right? And I think it's not surprising to any of us that have watched Durkin's work, not just at Auburn, but man, I think he's one of the hot two or three defensive coordinators, not just in the SEC but the country. So,
Yeah.
Whatever Auburn is and On to Victory is spending on NIL, which you've got to be competitive. I'm glad there was a cash outlay that John Cohen approved without having to think about it, I'm sure, to keep this defensive brain trust going. Of course, they lost Charles Kelly,
Yeah.
which hurts, especially recruiting, but not just recruiting. He's a coach. He's a coach that I had some disciples, selling me many years ago on bringing Dirk or Charles Kelly back in as DC, and maybe even a long shot head coach candidate back when. I don't think when we hired Harsin, but yeah, Durkin will be Ronnie, the second highest paid defensive coordinator in the country now.
Yeah, I believe so. And the philosophy around Auburn, I think rightly so after all the buyouts that have happened over the last several years. Pay guys whatever you want to. Just don't make them unfireable. And I think that's been the
vis-a-vis
philosophy.
buyouts, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from a head coach standpoint in particular, but pay those guys what you want to pay. I mean, look, that's the going rate nowadays. So he's the second highest paid coordinator in the country. Got Penn State got 3.1.
Yeah.
So it's and I'm not sure what Clemson was paying, but it wasn't far off as well. So that's the going rate these days. I mean, even the GMs are making. I mean, the GM at USC is making $1 million. I think the GM at Alabama is making $850, and so everybody's salaries just keep going up. So that's the price of doing business these days.
Yeah, and I'm an Auburn guy. There's always a danger of reaching to make a point, so I'll plead guilty before I even say it. But I think it's in an interesting way. It's a feather in Auburn, the Auburn brand, and Hugh Freeze's coaching ability to keep talented assistants and coordinators interested in staying on board. you can't blame Charles Kelly for getting a head coaching opportunity,
No.
albeit at Jack State, but he can parlay that into something bigger if he's able to win. But now, to say that the defending national champion with a war chest of NIL like Ohio State's always going to have, that you fended them off to keep Durkin, can only help you in the brand, and maybe even in some instances help you in recruiting defensive talent.
I don't think there's any question. And look, I think when you look back at Auburn's history in particular, I've got a story coming out, I think it's tomorrow, and it talks about Auburn's unrecognized. A lot of people want to say unclaimed. I was talking to Randy Campbell not too long ago, and he says, look, those championships have already been won. He said, we're not claiming them. He said, we're just recognizing them. And I think that's a pretty good point. But if you look at Auburn, Auburn had a great history, great tradition, all those things. But since Dye came on board, before Dye, Auburn had one conference championship, one national championship. Since Dye, there have been Dye had 4. Terry really should have had one in '97. Yeah. Tuberville had one in 2004. Chiswick had one. Gus had one. So you've got everybody who's been at Auburn outside of Harsin has won and won big. Jay Jacobs was on the podcast not too long ago, and he talked about the '89 game and how it really elevated Auburn's profile. It changed so many things, and I think he's 100% accurate. And I think a lot of the younger people on our site have it's tough for them to wrap their head around what it was like pre-1989, going into Legion Field and playing a quote unquote neutral site game, and it was anything but neutral.
That '89 game, I'm probably getting my chronology out of order here. So Rob that has a steel trap for a brain, he can fact check me. But I think the specter of that '89 game and Curry unable to win 3 in a row and getting fired, the fear of all. I hate it. Sounds silly to say Alabama would ever fear Auburn, but I think at that point with Coach Dye riding high, it did. And so it was not long after that, dare I say, because I love a good conspiracy theory, guys, that the brain trust in Birmingham said, we can't, this cannot stand. And it was not too long after that we started hearing in the news Eric and Twilita Ramsey. So, when you're starting to play well in Auburn and it looks like you're sustaining winning and championships and you have a chance to really take over, you have to watch all horizons, because you're not just having to take care of your own winning. Sometimes you're having to defend. I think it's just a different world now. As Lane Kiffin said a couple of summers ago, Rob, the NCAA has legalized cheating. So here we are.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of people too, you look around at, some people would say that, I'll quote Steve Spurrier. Their scholarships were worth more than ours were. And, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but at the same point in time, now that everybody's on a level playing field, it's going to be really interesting to see, how that plays out.
I think is the great Dukes part of your site, Ronnie?
He worked with us for a couple of years. He is
doing his own thing now.
He's doing his own thing now, but that could change.
I just want to give him credit, not be guilty of excessive plagiarism more than Jeff Berger plagiarized, right? If you know that war story.
Remember it well.
And it's a great one. I'll tell that at another date. But I was mesmerized to hear what Eric Singleton is doing in voluntary workouts. That, you think we're not going to sign anybody at wide receiver or return that it has more elite top end straight line speed than Malcolm Simmons, but we did. Eric Singleton is running I think it's a sprint exercise. He called it catapult or something. You probably know that, Ronnie. But Singleton ran that 23 miles per hour. Now, as an avid bear hunter, I came to understand that if you have a bear of any grizzly or black bear charging you, it's probably about 30 miles an hour.
Correct.
And you better be getting a drop in a hurry, because you might get one shot. So for perspective, Singleton he's not winning a race with a bear, and I know they look like big lumbering animals. They've got speed, brother. But that equates to it's not internet or message board hyperbole to try to extrapolate that into a legit 4.240. Is that insane? And this wide receiver group is, if it's who we think we've got, and Jackson Arnold most likely can deliver the ball on, we're going to be a problem for defenses, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And, we were talking before you came on. Look, there's going to be pressure, just like there is at any. Now you've got, it used to be the Big Six, and still is. There have been six schools that have won every championship in the conference since the '60s. Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee. So, when Texas or Oklahoma breaks through, that'll be the Big Eight, obviously, but it's a tough deal. It's a tough conference, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
And I think, although I'm excited about our running back room, I don't want to be so orange and blue tinted glasses that I act as if we're not going to miss in a particular game Jarquez Hunter. To me, the way he could break tackles, nothing is there, and he could turn it into a 6 or 7, sometimes an explosive 20-yard run or more. And we may see that from Austin. I think he's got the tools, but it's going to be by committee. And I think it's very timely, in my opinion, that on paper, and we hope that it translates to the field, that the improvements in the quarterback room and at wide receiver, especially Cam Coleman having a year under him, and Simmons, all those guys, that the passing game improving probably comes at an urgent time, since we might not have the durable break tackles, yards after contact back that we had in Jarquez.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think at the end of the day, I was talking to a prominent SEC coach a couple of days ago, and he says, look, at the end of the day, Freeze wants to throw the ball.
Yeah.
He wants to throw the ball. And, he said, if I had Jarquez Hunter, he said, he'd gotten the ball a lot more last year than he did. He said, but, he said, his quote was, he can't help himself. He just wants to throw the ball. And so we're about to find out. He's got a quarterback and he's got some receivers. So,
and Ronnie, I get the impression I've got a few more years on you, but not 20 years on you, perhaps. But I think, tell me if you agree, and you too, Rob, that there's still in the DNA of Auburn fans that aren't under, say, 35, that this queasiness about throwing it 35 or 40 times a game. It's the old Gene Stallings or Coach Dye. 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad. It's a negative, high anxiety point of view about throwing the ball, but we might have to, as a fan base, break out of that. And the best way to break out of it is for right out of the gate, when Auburn travels to Baylor, which, you got to hope it's a win, but it's a road win, and Baylor's, that's not a directional school. They've got players. So, but if we can come out of that game and really look competent in the passing attack, we pass to set up the run, that could be exciting. Rob?
Well, you think about what people hate in you is usually missing in them, and they want that. A lot of things, 2 out of 3 things when you throw it are not going to be good. But looking at last year, and I was getting into this, I think, right when you joined us, I almost felt like Hugh Freeze and the Auburn coaches were trying to placate, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, Bryce Kane, Cam Coleman, those receivers, and they didn't develop the running game. They didn't push the running game. And when Jarquez had that big breakout game against Kentucky, people went crazy. But all week long, they kept talking about the Kentucky game. And my rule of thumb is if by Wednesday or Thursday, you're still talking about the previous Saturday's game, guys, you're in trouble on Saturday.
The
And
team can beat you twice, right?
yeah. And
that's why I'm worried about the Vanderbilt game tonight.
Yeah, me too.
You can't have I don't think this team, as old as they are, will have a hangover, not pivoting out of football and into basketball. But when coaches really earn their money is whether it's through rough practices, or loving on you one way or the other. They get you past a loss. You have a short memory like a golfer has to
Yeah.
have after a triple birdie. I mean,
Yeah.
a triple bogey.
Yeah, I
Well,
agree. Yeah.
Doug, you said something earlier about uh, Alabama fearing Auburn and the situation there. It's going to be interesting this year. Even when Auburn's terrible, uh, the games in Auburn against Alabama tend to be
They have anxiety about that.
yes, and
And that's not me saying that. That's my good Bama friends that I count and whether I hunt with them. There's some classy ones at high IQ football, and they do not like coming to Jordan-Hare Stadium.
no, and I worked for Nick Saban at LSU, and know plenty of people who have worked on his staffs over the years. He hated it. Hated going down there, and even on game day last year, he said,
Did he
that
hate it
place
even at LSU, Ronnie?
not in the same way.
It's different, yeah. It's
And
just
I
a
was
little
only
different.
there. I was only there.
There's a fervor when the Iron Bowl is the game at our house. So
There's no.
I
There's
could
no
see
question.
LSU not. I mean, Jordan-Hare was hard for LSU to play at, but not anything like the Iron Bowl.
Yeah, and I was only there at LSU for 1 year. And LSU. We when I was at we lost. Auburn beat us. But it was. Coach Saban said it was. His quote was, "It's haunted." 2 or 3 years ago now, one of Alabama's players came out on the radio and said that, "Hey man, my teammates say that Jordan-Hare, it gives their players superpowers." And you see quotes like that over and over again. And look, I've been to a lot of Iron Bowls, and and my wife, she's a Florida Gator, and we met down there when I was working down there, and I remember taking her to her first Iron Bowl, and she looked around, and she's like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, and she'd been a part of big games. She was a sports nutritionist. She'd been at, Florida State and Florida, Georgia. I mean, so she'd been around big games. This is a whole different level.
It is. And one of the things about it is at Auburn, the old Tommy Agee saying, if you're going to play Auburn, you're going to have to get down in the dirt and play a full 60. And the crowd, it's almost a religious buy-in. The crowd loves Auburn with there's so much fervor and but it's a love of the laundry, and they love those players. And I think just my take on it is Auburn's doing an exceptional job of keeping their players around, and it's through NIL. And I have a friend who runs one of the collectives for Auburn, and I know some people involved in it. And I talked to him about it. Yeah, I don't like NIL, I don't like the portal, but either you embrace it or you are just going to be yesterday's news. You're going to be a dead man walking. And I think
Rob Dabo sounded antagonistic to it for a while, but
he did.
Reality has brought him around, hasn't it?
It has. And Ronnie, when he gets back on here with us, I want to get the take on that, because we talked with Jordan Davis Hill, 24/7 Sports, who covers Georgia, this morning on the show. Kirby likes maybe 5 or 6 kids a year if they're the perfect fit, but he builds his program out of high school. And that is the way he does it. Lane Kiffin doesn't like to recruit that much. So he likes to get the kids that want to come, the best ones. And then he's going to go, and Lane Kiffin's going to go say, hey, I've watched you at XY school, Z school for a year or two. I want to pay you to come play for me at Ole Miss. And then you got Dabo, who's brought in a couple of portal guys this year. But those are the 3 schools of coaching: the Kiffin way, the Kirby way, the Dabo way. But Ronnie, I gotta ask you, and you know that Auburn culture really well. You've also coached against it from afar, and I think that's something Terry Bowden was big on. And I got to say this, and you and I were talking earlier today. If you go back when he was hired, and right after the press conference, he jumped in that car in that Christmas parade in Auburn and ran out, recruited Willie Anderson out of Viger. He went and got Marcellus Mostello out of Gadsden. He got the big tight end out of Theodore, Alabama. He kept Auburn in August of '93 when that probation was announced. he gathered that team down on the field. My friend, the late Mark Green, the original Auburn blogger, called me on the phone. He said, Brown, you should have seen this, man. We got something special. And that freshman quarterback out of Blunt, Damian Craig, is going to be big one day. But he said,
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah. And Terry Bowden gathered them around and said, hey, look, there's two ways we can handle this. We can have a cry fest, or we can dig our heels in and shut out the outside world and win every game, because I've got talent out here and y'all know how to work. And he needs to get credit for that, because there's a lot of criticism of Terry Bowden. But I have said this always. He kept Auburn relevant when Auburn could have been irrelevant and down into the abyss of football hell. And for that alone, he deserves a special place in Auburn history that I will never forget. And I think he's kind of on the comeback tour, I hope. But he needs to be recognized for that.
Rob, this is an Auburn-centric show. Is that fair to say? This hour, whatever the time frame is, so I can get away with the seeming partisanship. And I'm happy to be wrong. When you're an Auburn fan, you develop a thick skin because you get treated to. I've said, Ronnie, that our problem in Auburn football is our standard deviation is way too big. We can go 3-9 and the next year run the damn table and or make a playoff. And I would like to shrink that a little, where a bad year is 8 wins and a big year is you're in the playoff, and we can do that now. But I was thinking, if you look at the strategic architecture of college football right now and how the playoff system works, and the fact that last year, if we didn't have the insanity of conference champions, for God's sake, in lesser conferences getting a bye, an open date, and then I think there was an argument, not a strong one, but an argument for South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama, or at least one or two of those to be in it. And certainly if we got to 16 teams, they're in. So now what has been missing in the architecture? Sometimes we have self-inflicted wounds, right, Ronnie, where we hire the wrong coach, or we have infighting, or we have too many cooks in the kitchen that happen to be billionaires that want to say in it who can, and I'm going to give them a say if they're the committee that runs Auburn football. But what was also missing, arguably, was for a program like Auburn that has all the ingredients to attract talent, but we didn't have necessarily the ability, what I would call a true level playing field. I think right now there are always going to be the Ohio States and the Texas programs and others, and Georgia and even Alabama, that have a lot of money and they can go build or buy a roster, but so can Auburn, enough to be really competitive. And so I think now if we can start, this year is going to be very telling. My hope is, I'm not going to be one of those irrational Auburn fans that says 10 wins is the ceiling, or the floor this year. That's kind of absurd. If Ole Miss with that roster couldn't do it last year, then we know how tough it is. But I believe the roster will be there, and it's up to this coaching staff to deploy it and make it happen. And you need a little lady luck along the way. But I hope that Auburn can either be like the South Carolina or Ole Miss to it. We don't have the roster Ole Miss did last year necessarily, but it's not way off from that if Jackson Arnold delivers. So I'm hoping that Auburn can make that next step. And then when we get into mid-November, you're talking about, if I'm right, you're talking about the Iron Bowl really meaning something about potential. If you win it, you make the playoff.
Yeah, there's no question. And you talked about a couple of different things. I'll hit Terry Bowden first. I agree with you. I was texting with Terry today. We've actually have him on the podcast next week. I think he deserves a lot of credit.
That'll be fun.
It should be, and he's doing much better now. He had some health issues, had COVID. He's doing much better now, and so I'm glad to hear it, and I'm glad that he's coming on. I think that some younger generations really that it's almost like that chapter of Auburn history. There are certain people around that want to erase that, and I'm not sure why. I guess I do know why, having been there, but Um, there's no reason to, because if you look at Terry, I mean, won his first 20 games, 21-1, and then won 8 the next 2 years, and then won 10 in '97. And look, if Karsten Bailey doesn't drop God knows how many passes in that game, then Auburn wins. I think we lost 29-30. So, in the next year, obviously the bottom fell out, but there were a lot of reasons for that. But as far as leadership at the university, I think that's been the biggest issue at Auburn for, for years. And the biggest problem was, you had Gouge, who was completely unplugged from athletics. You had Stephen Leith, who was completely plugged into athletics. And
tragic hire.
yeah, and look, he had ethical issues at Iowa State, and so you bring him in there, and then he hires Alan Green, who, really, what can you say?
Nice guy, in over his head.
Yeah, and then, then you bring back Gouge after Leith gets fired, who is on record as saying, "I don't fire coaches, I fire athletic directors." Well,
he was a laissez-faire president, right?
Yeah,
he was. And so now you've got a president who understands football and understands how important it is at Auburn. You've got an AD who understands that as well, and you've got a football coach who has SEC experience. So, and then you got Bruce Pearl in basketball. So everything is lined up for Auburn to do well.
The systems and processes are in place, aren't they?
They're in place. And one thing about Auburn that's a little bit different than some of these other places is all these other schools, if you look around the conference, they're all the state school. Auburn's really the only one that has kind of broken through, which is pretty interesting.
It's so cool. Did I interrupt you, Ronnie? I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I was. Let me throw something in along that line. When you're not the University of, when LSU is the University of Louisiana, even though there's the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, but that's what makes Auburn such a unique story right there. And as far as the alignment, about 3 weeks ago, we had Paul Feinbaum on the show, and then Brendan had interviewed
Mountain Brook resident Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Back into the city. But we had Paul Feinbaum on. Great conversation. And then Brendan also added to the show, he had interviewed Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier. And Urban Meyer made a great point. He said, I think what you have to have is alignment. He said, if you have alignment from the president to the athletic director to the board of trustees and regents and the faculty, the alumni, the coaches, you can accomplish anything. And that man detests losing. Hugh Freeze, I know a lot about him from Memphis, from people that coached against him. I've heard everything you can imagine. He can recruit. And he's at a place with a super passionate fan base, Ronnie. I would like to see Auburn welcome back Terry Bowden, Doug Barfield, all these coaches, because Doug Barfield left a lot of talent for Coach Dye to work with. He had P.W. Underwood as defensive coordinator.
I knew P.W. when I was at Southern Miss.
Yeah.
He used to come over and we'd hang out, and he was a piece of work now. He's something else. But good guy.
And think about it, the national championship win over Oregon. 17 of the 22 starters on that field were Tommy Tuberville recruits. So we need to, and I thought that was cool that Cliff Ellis kissed the AU logo Saturday when he came back for that recognition 25 years later. But Ronnie, I can't wait to see Terry Bowden on here. If you can't forgive people, there's something wrong with you.
You invoke Terry Bowden, and I've got, I think a rational Auburn person, two things can be true as the cliche goes, guys. That you can be aware of and not, dismiss that Terry, I'm sure Terry with his close friends would say, here's a few missteps I made. We're human, I made at Auburn. But and I can't imagine what it must have felt like to be coach at Samford, and you come in your first year and under the weight of probation, you run the damn table. And that's a lot sometimes people don't cope with success defeat can do weird things to you. But I will tell you this: one of the odd things for me to understand all that about Terry and things that I wish had gone differently, but also to look at um, two or three of my absolute favorite, and I was there live and in the flesh. Auburn games were with Terry Bowden as head coach, and probably the my absolute favorite wasn't even at Jordan Hare. It was in 1997 in Death Valley, and that
Oh
God
God.
Almighty, that
Mhm.
game. I was walking in the stadium. I think I've told you, Rob, and there was this throng of people. You know how the line backs up to get in, and I've got Auburn garb on, and this beautiful brunette LSU co-ed comes running up to me. And I thought, is this someone I know from ages ago? And I thought she was going to say, "Hey, welcome to Death Valley," and she said, "Auburn sucks." And
Yeah.
she's like, right, this is a woman, a female student. I said, "Welcome to Death Valley, brother."
Yeah.
And that game, Bill Oliver told me, if if we didn't have Takeo Spikes on defense, LSU Cecil Collins would have run for 500 yards. So that was
Yeah.
just one. And Damian Craig was a hero.
God. Yeah.
Takeo. So I'm grateful to Terry Bowden, not to mention that one in the swamp in '94. Good grief.
Yeah.
Well, and you look around. I mean, there were so many great games. I mean, the '93 Iron Bowl. I was there. We got to the gas station there. I forget. Right
Hey,
off
Ronnie,
280 there.
you see that right there?
Oh
I've got the
hell
same one in my
yes.
office in there.
My dad
Uh,
painted that.
Tommy
is that right?
Tommy
Yeah.
Bowden
I
deserves.
can get you a copy if you want one, Doug.
Oh, that's the Florida. I was thinking
The
of the
catch.
'93 Alabama, but
Yeah.
Tommy Bowden, an underrated call that Tommy Bowden suggested from the press box. Fourth down, was it 4th and 10 at the 35? You don't want to punt there, but to take that chance in that '93 unbelievable call right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you look at that coaching staff. There are a lot of good coaches. I mean, Pete Jenkins, Rick Trickett,
God. Yeah.
Jimbo Fisher, Joe Witt, Tommy Bowden. I mean, there were a lot of really really good coaches on that staff.
Allison,
I'm sorry,
running back coach Ronnie Allison,
Rodney
running back.
Allison.
Yeah.
Rodney
You-
Allison. He messaged
And
me
you
on
had
Facebook not long ago.
God, you had it. And if you look up here, you see right there, up there, the one I'm looking at right there. That's the 1982 Auburn Tennessee game. My dad painted that. That's Bo early in the season as a freshman going over the top against Tennessee successfully for a 2-point conversion. Just
Yeah,
kind of,
and you
I've
oh,
know,
got a
it,
piece of the '97 when we beat Alabama, and my future roommate Freddie Kitchens was the quarterback in '97, and the goalposts came down,
yeah.
and I've actually got a piece of the goalpost sitting in my office in there.
and
Um,
you think
God.
we might have a lurking Bama fan or two, which would welcome guys.
With open arms.
It's happy hour, and it's nice to be able to enjoy the show at happy hour instead of your 8 a.m. hour, Rob, when I'm have to drink coffee with it. Now, if I'm Frank Duffy, I've got a little Irish whiskey going, but
Yes, sir.
I honestly, you think of hiring decisions and how history takes a right or left turn or hits the ditch. But wouldn't it be fun if you could somehow play out what might have been? Think about this: if Alabama had hired the great Bobby Bowden when they insulted, and he would say, and to be fair to Alabama, they can hire go through a process however they wish as a headhunter. I don't think you hire a headhunter to hire a college football coach if he's as proven as Bowden. But if Bobby Bowden comes to Alabama and all the advantages and leverage and recruiting advantages they had at the time, I shudder to think how things might have gone. But I guess we would have been treated to a Dye versus Bobby Bowden Iron Bowl rivalry that would have been one for the ages.
no question, Terry Bowden never would have been the head coach at Auburn, and furthermore, I mean, let's extrapolate that on out. What if Rich Rodriguez takes Alabama before, and
Oh
backs
yeah,
out, and Nick Saban's
the
head
right
coach?
and left turns of what might have been.
Yep. I mean, if I remember right, Steve Spurrier actually flew in and considered taking the Alabama job. Flew in one night, looked at facilities, uh, and then went back to South Carolina. So
Hmm.
there
Yeah.
were a lot of different things that went on.
Ronnie, I want to play a little rapid fire with both of y'all. You think about the the changes that are happening. Uh, we had 23 teams in the Southern Conference 100 years ago. There were in 1923 there were 23 teams from Virginia down to Texas and pretty much everything in between. In 1933, the SEC came together. Sewanee, Georgia Tech, and Tulane are no longer members. Although all three are welcome to come back anytime they want to and become members of the SEC. Couldn't you see Sewanee doing that? I think that would be kind of cool. But one thing, Tony Barnhart, we have him on the show a lot. He's right. At the end of the day, with all the distractions, the portal and NIL, Ronnie, don't we just love the games, and we want these players. In this case, at Auburn, and I'm so blessed to be with Brendan every day, talking to all these SEC schools, coaches, players, writers. But we just love the games, and we want them to love it like we do. I think we're going through a rough patch now, but Ronnie, I think we're going to get back to that because there's only so many times you can shake the old Bucky's cup to your donors to get money. Boy, wouldn't they be a great sponsor? Anyway, I digress, Ronnie.
Yeah, there's no question. And you look around. I thought last year was going to be the first time, and Florida ended up having to pulling it out. But I mean, if I went all season long saying that this is going to be the. Can you imagine Florida and Auburn having 4 consecutive losing seasons at the same time?
Ugh.
And like I say, Florida kind of pulled it together at the end. But
yeah,
it's those kinds of places. I'll tell you, Ron Zook told me, he coached at Florida. He said, the loudest place I ever coached was Auburn. He said that 93 game, and that's 94 game, I guess, 93 game, when Calvin Jackson intercepted that pass at the and took 5. And took it back.
I was there, and there was no TV. 90 Auburn was on probation.
No TV, Ronnie.
I never. There's certain. I know both you guys. There's certain games. That game is so meaningful to me because my late father. We sat in the south end zone, and would you believe I would buy season tickets, I don't know, 10, 15 years later after my father died, and my seats were almost within 1 or 2 rows from where my dad and I sat. We had just bought on the open market.
Wow.
But we were sitting in that end zone, and as the fourth quarter started, were you at that game, guys?
Oh, I was there.
93, and there was this light drizzle. It wasn't a driving rain. You remember that? Yep. And the fourth, and I started, oh God, we're going to have to kick a field goal, and the ball's going to be wet. You start having doom and gloom thoughts, and that team, goodness gracious, Ace Atkins and guys that you've never heard of coming off the edge and making sacks. And you beat a Steve Spurrier team, and you're coming off of you're in a year where no one's ever heard of Terry Bowden except for his last name, and you pull off a shocker like that. And then the encore is to go back and when Spurrier's got every revenge motivation known to man, and you go do it again, that you got to tip your hat to Terry Bowden those 2 years.
Yeah, and Ronnie,
he did a terrific job, managing the team, and talking about that '93 season. I was down on the goal line. I was sitting on the goal line down there where Frank Sanders caught the pass, and dove in, and then for the Calvin Jackson pass, I was actually in the Florida section. My uncle was a Florida grad, and so we went with them, and I was on the goal line down there on the other side when Calvin Jackson took it back.
Trivia question: What play in recent big rivalry memory would remind you of the Calvin Jackson interception for pick 6?
Smoke Monday in the Iron Bowl.
No, not smoke. It was Hacksaw.
Oh,
Zacoby McClain.
Zacoby McClain out of Valdosta, Georgia.
How many Auburn has no chance in that 2019 Iron Bowl, but for 2, not 1, but 2 pick 6s. Insane.
Yeah. It was insane. Hey, I'll tell you, a guy, Calvin Jackson, Ronnie, at that game and Doug in '93, Chop Dog was his nickname out of Dillard High School. Auburn signed 22 players out of there. Mm-hmm. Coach Dye, by the way, told a story on Bill Cameron's show, The Afternoon Drive in Auburn. My son was a freshman at Auburn, and I got everybody, Coach Dye and everybody on the show, I sent them a copy, a print of my dad's thing of the catch, and Coach Dye got his picture. It was autographed, and I was on the show with him. He goes, "Rob, that's that's a fine painting you did. I goes, no, sir, coach, that was my dad. He goes, you tell your daddy he's a hell of an artist. But he told a story about Frankie Sanders, his recruiting. He said, we
Dillard,
got
right?
they got Otis Mounds, took a lot of heat for that. Went back down there the next year, and Coach Dye would walk through the halls at that school and be mobbed by those kids. They just loved him. And he said, he goes, I walked in a room and I met Frankie Sanders' mama, and she was wearing a wig. She was going through cancer treatment. She had terminal brain cancer. And she pulled me aside and said, Coach, and he told this on the show, but he said, I want you to promise me you'll make him into a great man. And he said, I made a promise, and he's every bit of that. But just cool stories about that. That play when Calvin Jackson went 95 yards, that may have been the biggest play in the last 30 plus years of Auburn football, because it put Auburn on the map, guys. When
And that
most
game was about to get away from Auburn.
Yeah. And people had already picked out Auburn's burial suit, ordered the flowers, and the shovels were ready to throw the dirt on Auburn's grave. That's why I can't wait to hear Terry Bowden on this podcast, what you're going to do with him. Doug and I think what you would second that, Doug, because Ronnie, the content that y'all are putting out at AU Undercover, I mean, Jason Caldwell, Christian Clemente, Nathan King, Philip Marshall he's a great writer, but he's one of the funniest people when he tells the story.
He's terrific. And we do a series. We need to start it. We're going to start it back soon. It's Thursdays with Philip. And basically it's just Philip on, he gives his views on what's going on currently. And he likes to get on, and I like for him to get on and tell stories.
He's something else on that.
Let him go, man.
Wind him up and get out of the way.
And he's now.
I think he's mentoring their interns. We lost Ronnie there for a second. I think and Doug,
He'll come back.
Doug, yeah. Ronnie, you were telling a story, but he's more working with your interns.
He's mentoring our interns, and so I feel like that so they've got kind of a two-part internship, but the writing part is with Philip, and I tell him, I'm like, look, he's like an encyclopedia.
Yes.
Oh God, is he ever?
And we've got a style guide, and he wrote it. So it's we use AP style, and there are certain things we like to do and certain things we don't like to do. And he, but he's a stickler for doing things the right way. And his dad taught him that. And it's really he's got a neat story. And Philip came from a newspaper when we started this thing 16 years ago, and it's been a heck of a ride. It really has. I mean, he neither one of us knew what we were doing. I was fortunate to find investors, and Philip was the first person that I hired. And but neither one of us. We had a lot of contentious phone calls over the next couple of years after we started this thing. But we broke a lot of stories, and we were fortunate. There was a lot of news. We got lucky. When we started the websites. My investors were in South Mississippi, and so then you had the Great Recession, and then you had the oil spill, and it was just kind of one thing after another. And so the fact that we were able to be successful, and we had 6 sites at that particular point in time that were affiliated with ESPN, and trying to fund all of them, and so we probably grew it too fast, but Auburn came along great, and look, there's still two. There are still 2 sites, two more sites on 24/7. The Oregon site is the market leader, and we started it, and then I still license it to CBS, and then the Florida State site, 24/7 bought it. So there's 3 sites on 24/7 that my group actually started. So
we got 2 minutes. 2 minutes left. Yeah.
I want to put a quick place card on normally it's an obscure part of looking ahead to the football season, but I think for Auburn, in which we're not, I think we're getting there, but we're not. I don't think there are 8 or 9 games on the schedule that Auburn's likely to dominate when going away. So what do you read into that? Well, a kicking game, special teams really matters, and I will be watching as we're in spring and heading into summer. Alex McPherson, bless him, he's had surgery, as you guys know, that was successful, and he's putting weight back on. The fact that he was unable to go last year and dealt with all of that prematurely, it looks like, put Towns Magoo out there as a true freshman in big games. And then we were playing the kind of games, thanks to the misery on offense, that and Peyton Thorne's and other struggles, that we were unable to do it. But so you got this Connor Gibbs from Southern Miss that I think you could see him early season. And I hope that they, in the spring and summer, they figure out who can they rely on to make a winning field goal, because we would have won a couple more games last year with more competent place kicking.
Yeah,
No doubt.
yeah. Ronnie and Doug, this is fun. We got to do this again. Big one tonight, Vandy in Nashville Saturday. How crazy is it going to be? And you'll be back on. We'll be back on tomorrow morning on SEC Sidelines. And Ronnie, tell people how they can follow you and all the great content you put out, because there's nobody that does a better job of covering the Auburn Tigers than your crowd. And Powell will agree with me on that one.
He outed you last Friday, Ronnie.
Yeah, well, I think I was outed a couple of years ago. He was it. Did I get outed again last Friday?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yes, he did.
I didn't
this very
realize that.
show.
He did this.
Well,
Oh,
check out Auburn Undercover. We have a subscription special running right now. So a lot of good things.
Already a member, proud member.
Me too.
Good deal.
Guys, I
And-
greatly enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. And if you need a filler like me in future shows, you know how to find me, Rob.
Hey, that was fun, man. I love the new studio down there. It looks
Next
great.
time I'll have my man cave. I'll put the big black bear rug in the background.
Point of trivia, Bear can run up to 35 miles an hour. Hey, see y'all in the morning. We'll be on the Buddy Martin Show tonight on this channel at 9 p.m. Eastern. So thanks for watching, everybody.
Let's go Auburn and Vanderbilt tonight.
Absolutely.